Hello everyone, this is Matt Singleton. Welcome to Bible. Ha ha! Alright, basically today I am responding to Richard Carrier. He's making an argument against the resurrection. And seems like an Ivy League atheist, it seems like he's a popular man talking to these other big wigs. And I've seen him debate, for instance, Michael Lacuna and a couple other people. And I was watching one or two other debates with Gary Habermas and just some different arguments about the resurrection. One thing though I noticed that, if you listen to Lacuna or Habermas or say William Lane Craig, what you're going to get is you're going to get these guys are extremely intelligent, but they've done something that is really not the wisest way to do it. With classic apologetics, it's kind of like, all right, stand back. I'm going to defend Christianity from an Aristotelian worldview, But I like to defend the resurrection and Christianity from a biblical worldview. The difference is that and I noticed it really strong with Habermas. He was kind of saying, well, I'm going to defend the resurrection regardless of whether Scripture is inspired or not. And at that point, you've made it a lot harder because the way this fellow Carrier is going to come off, he's kind of playing off of that, and he's going to say, well, if you were to tell me that you had a jet plane, that's possible, but it's just a little bit incredible that you would just happen to have a jet plane. But if you were to tell me that you had a starship, well, nobody's ever seen a starship. So basically that's really nearly impossible. I'd need a lot of proof to believe that. And what he's going by is, to believe the idea that a man died and rose from the grave. They're going to let him get away with that. My thing is that Jesus, though fully human, is not just a man. Jesus is God in human flesh. It's not that a man became God, it's that God became a man. And basically, we have, prophecies and stuff that go along that way. But also, when he takes a look at this stuff, when Richard Carrier looks at this stuff, he's operating from a naturalistic worldview. Why do you have the right to operate from a naturalistic worldview 2,000 years after the fact? Okay, if we're going to go through history and kind of be true to being historians, we were not there. We're listening to someone who experienced it. We are dealing with the evidence, okay? But basically, they're the ones who are there, and they're the ones who have to be convinced, and then they write it down, and we deal with their account. When we look at ancient history, we don't have naturalists. The philosophy of naturalism was, just not really around. Now, there was skepticism. There was many skeptical people, and even skeptical people among the Jews and the Greeks in the New Testament. But we don't see people who say there is no such thing as a miracle. There's no such thing as a supernatural. Why is it? Was it just that we have to assume that everyone was primitive and dumb? I mean, the Greek society that we're dealing with, they were some of the most incredible engineers known. Them, the Egyptians. And the Greeks had an incredible grasp of mathematics and geometry. And I think I've heard record that they were even able to calculate the distance of the Earth to the Sun. Okay? Because they were able to eventually measure light and, kind of discern the speed through the different timing, the shadows, and the rotation, and and the sun and stuff like that. So, basically, when you look at this, intelligent people, they were living in a world and they could not discern that it was naturalistic. And we assumed that every other period that we never experienced was naturalistic, because some of us today don't believe in the supernatural. How does an atheist even determine what supernatural is? Okay, I've talked before about the problems of epistemology and, being able to be certain and know anything if there is, if there is no higher intelligence and everything's made out of chaos. How do you know that there are laws of science that are always at work at all times, everywhere? Do we really know that? No, we don't. We don't know what's going on 100 years in the future. We don't know what went on, 20,000 years in the past. We don't know every single continent. We haven't even mapped out everything that's underneath the Pacific Ocean. Okay? And, we've never even been more than maybe 10, 15 miles below the Earth, below the Earth's surface. So, when we kind of study this stuff, the naturalistic worldview operates on assumptions, and the Greeks were not willing to take that bet. They wanted to operate from what they were sure of, because, they could end up getting killed otherwise. Especially when we talk about, their knowledge of engineering and stuff like that. They had to make these buildings exact, or, they just fall down and die. So, basically, he's deciding that he gets to impose this. And because of the way classic apologetics is developed and centered on Aristotelian philosophy, basically they're going to just let him do it, and I'm not. So, basically, he's going to talk about, well, what about all these myths? There's all these myths that have very similar miracles of Jesus and stuff like that, and it's all, there's just like tons of like resurrection stories. Now, he said there's no resurrection accounts, but there's tons of stories, okay? Now, the Bible, okay? See, they were dealing with some sort of form of Christianity. I'm dealing with the Bible, okay? The Bible explains this. It talks about in Genesis chapter 11, where it talks about the great Tower of Babel. It was there that first started rebelling against God. Jewish tradition, like Josephus, talks about how the different world religions were developed at that point, the different forms of paganism developed, in astrology and stuff, the worship of the stars. They wanted to build a name up in heaven and all that kind of stuff. So basically, when they got to that point, they started to interpret the stars in a certain way that would develop a pagan religion. And all these other religions kind of followed after that. Now, what were the stars originally? Well, if there's an intelligent designer and we see symbols up in the sky in the form of constellations, then perhaps those constellations are telling us something. And that is a concept that was developed by E.W. Bullinger, and Henry Morris agreed to it. Also, D. James Kennedy also agreed with it, and they call it the gospel and the stars. And so all these constellations, which form symbols, and the ancient people used symbols and hieroglyphics, that was developing a gospel message. One obvious one would be, like, for instance, constellation where they have Virgo, the Virgin. So they all have these concepts of virgin births and stuff like that. Now, if everybody's thinking about this, and then you have one record of actual happening, maybe it's, this stuff is bearing witness to the fact that this was going to happen. And then you have, like, Bible prophecy, okay? The Bible prophesied about Jesus Christ. He's the Son of God. He's doing all these miracles. It's not a regular guy that this is happening to. It's not some weird random accident. Instead, we got prophecies about his virgin birth, for instance. We got about, depending on how you interpret it, somewhere between 300 and 400 prophecies concerning Christ and the New Testament and stuff like that. So, what we do is, I'm just going to give you two examples, okay? But one is talk about the virgin birth. This is Isaiah 7:14, and he says, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel," which means God with us. Now, some would argue, well, that was a young woman. That's not much of a sign, okay? I think pregnant teenagers are not unique miracles. miracles, okay? Now, a pregnant virgin is a unique miracle, and most of the young teenage women back then, they were segregated and stuff, they weren't really away anyway, so they were usually considered to be virgins. But basically, God with us. You know, the Jews don't believe in Christ or his deity and stuff, and yet here it is in the Hebrew Scriptures, 800 years beforehand, and it says, okay, he's going to be God with us. Okay, so you got that prophecy, and here's another one later on. This is in Micah. This is Micah 5:2, and it says, "But thou, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose going forth shall be from of old, from everlasting." So here you go again. He's the eternal God, the Messiah, and he's coming from a virgin, and he's also coming where? It's from a virgin, but also in Bethlehem. Okay? Now, you know, what are the statistics that you're going to find someone who claims to be a virgin out in Bethlehem? And remember, a lot of the people didn't know the prophecies that well. They didn't, you know, a lot of them didn't read and stuff like that. They had it read to them. And so basically, you know, and even a lot of Jews are sitting here arguing that this stuff is not about the Messiah anyway. So, you know, basically, what are the odds that that's going to happen? All right. You've got hundreds of these prophecies all over the place talking about his death, burial, and talking about the resurrection and things like that. So, you know, that's the first thing, is that we're not going to sit here and assume atheism and then add Christ to it, okay? Another thing is, like, you know, he starts talking about the developing of a myth and how, you know, it was some sort of massive hallucination, and that basically everybody went out and they just started believing this myth. Now, here's the thing, okay, when it comes to myths and stuff like that and skepticism, you know, if you have an incredible event happen, people can end up denying it, okay? We had 9/11 several years ago. I think from this date it would probably be about 11 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And basically, it wasn't but 3 or 4 years that people started saying, oh, well, that was staged, okay? You know, 40, 50 years ago, we had somebody land on the moon, and they say, oh, that was staged. Okay? So, it's easy for skepticism to develop. Meanwhile, not only do you have all these myths that could be like Christ, and they were all assumed to be fake, but you had about 30 different pretenders to the title Messiah in the century that Jesus lived. So, every one of them is debunked. Skepticism, 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 okay? Everybody's saying they're Messiah. So how is the same old claim going to take over the whole empire, okay, from a people that's not even very well accepted, okay? Not only were the Jews not accepted, but you're talking about a group that's not accepted in the non-accepted group, okay? You're talking about, you know, the followers of the way who are not accepted by the Jews, who are not accepted by the Romans, okay? And how is this, if it's just plain old the same thing, you know, how does that work, okay? You know, at some point we have to deal with reality, okay? What is it that convinced the disciples? Because the disciples ended up killing themselves, not killing themselves, they ended up getting themselves killed over this, okay? They were all crucified and killed and stuff like that. Paul was beheaded. Well, Jesus showed up in the flesh, in his resurrection. They weren't told about a starship. They saw the starship, okay? They saw Jesus Christ right there in the flesh, and he said, hey, look at my ribs, okay? Look at the nail scars in my hands. Here I am, right here in the flesh. They could test it. They could verify it. You know, he's sitting there, and they get off the boat, and they're eating fish. They could see fish being eaten by this man. Ghosts don't eat fish. Okay, you had 500 witnesses, and I have a theory, I could be wrong, but to me a likely explanation how Paul came up with the number 500 is that Paul was taking a record as working professionally for the Sanhedrin, torturing Christians. He was basically trying to get them annihilated, get them to change back and all that kind of stuff. It was his job to stop them from believing in Jesus. Okay, he believed that that was heresy. Well, him being a skeptic and believing that that was heresy, he would find people who said, yes, I believe in the resurrection because I saw it. I was there. Okay? And it wasn't a one-time event where everybody was just emotional. It was 40 days straight. Okay? That's kind of hard to keep up that much emotion and insanity for over 40 days straight. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So he found about 500 people, and under torture, they said, hey, look, I saw this. That's it. Okay? So that's my theory on, how they came up with the 500. And so, all these people are dying for it, even if they were skeptical. James and the whole family that Jesus had was kind of skeptical. Rarely is a prophet welcome in their hometown. All of a sudden they believe. And then Paul is, hired to take them out. And I think Carrier kind of said something along the lines of, well, Paul just probably felt guilty. No. He didn't feel guilty. They were heretics. The only way that he could feel guilty is if he believed otherwise. Okay? And, he firmly believed it was heresy. Now, when Paul, one thing Carrier doesn't talk about, he doesn't have a lot of details, but when Paul was visited, this is in Acts 9, by the Lord Jesus Christ, he didn't know if Jesus had physically come because he was blinded by light. But what they don't tell you is that the other people that were with Paul could hear Jesus speaking to him, not just Paul himself. Then he goes and he's greeted by Ananias, and the prophet Ananias had kind of told him, he's like, okay, well, God talked to me and he told me to confirm this to you. Okay, so you have another witness there with another supernatural occurrence happening. Once again, we don't have to assume naturalism. We just have to assume historical record. And, did people doubt this stuff? Sure. Carrier talks about, when they were speaking in tongues. And, some of the Jews and people were skeptical of that. And they said, oh, well, these guys are drunk. Well, the 3,000 people converted knew they weren't drunk. Because, two reasons. Number one is that wine back then was watered down. It was early in the morning. And Peter said, how can we be drunk? It's early in the morning. Okay? Because it would take you about 16 glasses to get drunk back then because there was such a low proof on the percentage of alcohol. But also, it's the fact that, okay, well, they're skeptical. So, they could obviously, wipe this myth out. Okay? But instead, it was proved because when they spoke in tongues, they weren't just blathering. They were speaking foreign languages and they were understanding it miraculously. Okay, it's like I speak to you in Russian, you understand it in Spanish. All right, so you got that going on. And then, the other thing was that there's no other visions other than Paul. So they're having all these ecstatic experiences, but nobody's claiming that Jesus has literally come back to earth yet. Think about that. Okay, if the ecstatic experiences of Pentecost on forward are exactly what happened to the apostles, wouldn't they see Jesus too? So he says, so basically there were skeptics who needed to be proven wrong. People did kind of weigh the idea that this was something that could be insanity, but when you have that many witnesses over that long period of time, 40 days, and the fact is they had proof, well, the Jews never came up with the body, okay? They had more power, they had the, and none of that is explained, like, how is it that Jesus' body is in the tomb, and then they get the body out of the tomb without killing Roman soldiers, which would have been very hard, but also that would have tipped off the Roman guard who would have killed them off too. Okay, and the Roman guard didn't kill them off. All right, so why did the Roman guard not kill them off? Because they didn't do anything. Okay? The Roman guards were scared off by the angels. Okay? And so when they were scared off by the angels, they tried to say, in the book of Matthew it says that they said, well, no, this is not what happened, and maybe dogs drug them out. Okay? But that's not what happened. A lot of people try to say, well, maybe it just didn't exist. I think Carrier in another video tries to go that route too. So I don't know why you would deny the resurrection and then, try to say, well, not only that, but also, once you deny the existence of Jesus, you'd be good there. But Roman historians and Jewish historians, everybody agreed that Jesus existed. Okay, they tried to find alternative reasons for the resurrection. The Jews are sitting there saying, oh, well, I bet that Jesus, his mom must have did it with a Roman guard, ha, ha, ha. Well, that's admitting they exist. And then the Muslims later on, what are they doing? They're saying, oh, well, Jesus was replaced by an angel on the cross. Why couldn't they just deny that had happened? Because it was official record. It was historical record. And you can't, it's like, this is where, facts are easy to misinterpret, but, facts can't just go away if you're trying to be serious about this. You have to operate from, let's start off with history. Let's start off with what they get us, or what they give to us. And then from there, we don't say, well, I don't agree with that person, so now that person, is making up a myth. You have to